Good evening, everyone. This is Monique Grigley with the Mo You Know show tonight, and I have a special guest with me, Mr. Dan Helm. Say hello.
Hi,
All right.
everyone.
So we're going to do something a little bit different on the Mo You Know show tonight. So I have a unique opportunity to host or moderate the meet and greet for Mr. Dan Helm. So for all of your followers, Mr. Helm, what I'd like the opportunity to do is tell a little bit about what the show is and how we operate and get going. So basically, the Mo You Know show is around knowledge transfer of all types. And currently, in the height of the elections that are going on currently, I am interviewing and trying to learn as a resident of Pinellas County more about who our candidates are. I thought it'd be really cool to give you all an opportunity to view and learn along with me. So I'll be asking and introducing you all to Mr. Dan Helm as a candidate of Supervisor of Elections for Pinellas County, learning a little bit more about him, and it's going to be a good time. We also will give you an opportunity to ask any questions that you have via the comments. I'll pop some of them up there every now and then. So this is going to be an interactive engagement. We're going to have some fun together tonight. So I hope you guys are all buckled in and ready to learn. All right. So Mr. Helm, Dan, I really appreciate you giving me this opportunity. I will not let you down. I promise.
I know that. Yeah, just Dan is fine.
All right, Dan. Thank you. Thank you. So do me a favor. Could you tell me a little bit about yourself, your history, background?
Yeah. And first, I want to say what an awesome show. Like knowledge transfer, giving people knowledge about their candidates. Like I wish, like that's my job as supervisor, your next supervisor elections, having biographies on the website, having who these people are and where they come from. The League of Women Voters does a really good job for this as well. But you doing this is a public service, so thank you for that. So everyone, hi, meet and greet. Please ask questions in the chat. Mo's going to ask me some questions, but I'm Dan Helm. I'm running for supervisor elections in Pinellas. It's my home. It's where I grew up before I went to law school, became this fancy lawyer, and came down to work on voter protection issues. I was born and raised in public schools in Pinellas. And so I have a real passion for this county. I want to make sure that everybody has their voice heard at the ballot box. I think everybody should have the right to vote. We shouldn't put up barriers to the vote. We should be expanding access to the ballot, expanding registration, expanding turnout, making sure people are involved, making sure that there's good candidates that they can come participate in our fragile thing we call democracy. So who am I? It's a philosophical question, but I'm Dan Helm. I'm your candidate for supervisor elections in Pinellas. I'm going to be your next supervisor elections.
All right. I see how you just manifest that. I'm going to be that.
That's right. Put it out there in the universe.
Absolutely. So I like to kind of start at the basics, so to speak, and learn a little bit more about what the supervisor of elections responsibilities are. What does that role actually entail?
That's great. It's a good question. It's one that, this office doesn't get a lot of attention, but it's an elected office, right? It's elected by the voters. It's the administrator of all the elections. So anytime you're going to vote, whether it's a municipal election, they work with the municipal clerks, or a countywide election. Like this office is countywide, your tax collector, your state attorney, we share with Pasco. You're going to see those names on the ballot. My job is to make sure the names are on the ballot, make sure that the votes that come vote by mail are counted, make sure that everything, the process is straightforward, information to the voters, registration, that you can vote early, that you can vote at election day, the poll workers, all the employees. So the supervisor elections has an office of about 40 to 45 permanent staff. There's a lot of temporary staff with poll workers, temporary employees to be on the phones during election time. During certain times of the year, it's much busier. So for November, or even right now, there's voting happening right now for early voting for the election. And so it's an important office because it also determines your access to the ballot. It's this one person that makes important decisions about how you can get registered and following the law that is codified in our election code and Florida statutes. And so there's all these also other different laws for federal laws that interact with state law. And so we'll get into some of that, but it's an important office. I didn't realize how important it was until I left the county and saw how this one office can really restrict access to the ballot. So for instance, in Pinellas, we only have 3 early voting locations. Previously,
Okay.
like, but yeah, 3. Well, 3 early voting. In Hillsborough, our neighbor, they have 24 early voting locations. In Pasco, half of our population, they have 11. We have 3. And this one person makes that decision. We can change that more. Like, we are the most densely populated county in the state. Does it make sense that we have the least amount of early voting locations? No. And we can change that with this one person. We will change that once I'm in office.
Okay, awesome. So I think you kind of touched on your why a little bit in explaining what the supervisor of election does, but I'd really love to unpack a little further your why in regards to why you're running for, supervisor of election.
Absolutely, right? So I told myself I'd never really be engaged in politics or get involved in office. I've been active in politics behind the scenes, making sure people can get registered to vote, watching the polls, making sure the process is fair. And after I was done with law school in 2016, I got involved in a big way in Florida with the Voter Protection Group. And I saw the impact of this office in terms of making decisions that affect voters, affect people's ability to get registered, giving right information about those timelines and the registration process. If you've ever been frustrated by the process, it shouldn't be that way. If you've ever tried to find information on the supervisor elections website and you can't figure it out, it shouldn't be that way. It doesn't have to be frustrating. And in some cases, I saw that there was a law violation. The supervisor elections was just not following the law. I actually had to sue a supervisor elections in 2018 as a private citizen. I walked into the office and I said, "Hey, you're not following the statute. Can you please follow the law?" And they said, "No, we're not going to change it. If you have a problem with it, sue us." They didn't know as a lawyer, and I could sue them, but so I did. I filed a lawsuit. They saw the lawsuit. The lawyer said, "I heard that you came in, but I didn't think you'd sue us. But I'm a lawyer. I don't get paid until there's a lawsuit on my desk. So I see that your lawsuit's here. You're absolutely right. That's the way the statute reads. What do you want?" And so we settled it. They started following the law, but it took me going in and saying, "Hey, stop breaking the law." It shouldn't be that way, right? So, information should work both ways. If a citizen says, "Hey, Dan, you're doing something wrong, you're doing something illegal," I'll pay attention. I'll listen. I'll make it more inclusive process. So make sure that the voters are informed about the right way to do things.
Yeah, and for my edification, that's a choice of the supervisor of elections to listen or not listen. It's not like you have to wait, right?
Right.
Okay.
Absolutely. Right. Like, yeah, not at all. Right. That's a choice to be inclusive or to put up barriers. Right. I mean, one thing that frustrates me this week, I've been at the supervisor elections office watching the canvassing board meet. They are making decisions on whether ballots are accepted for signature mismatch or not. And this is supposed to be a public meeting. People are supposed to be able to observe it, even make objections sometimes, so it's on the record but there's
a meeting where they're verifying the signatures is supposed to be public.
Yeah, even that, it's a public meeting. It's supposed to be public so that people can observe the process, observe this democracy, make sure that things are happening. There's places that people can challenge. For candidates, I'm allowed to see duplicate ballots that are created in the process. So duplicate ballots are sort of complicated. If something happens, say you spill coffee on your ballot or it gets rain damage or something, and you still send it in, that ballot might have trouble being read by the machine. And so what they do is they go through a process of duplicating that ballot. And so they take that ballot and they take it to somebody and they check and they make an exact copy of that ballot. But then it goes through like 3 steps of process that they all confirm that this is checked. But it's supposed to be, it's like a public hearing. I mean, that duplication of the ballot is open to candidates. There's barriers, right? So I talk about barriers. I want you to think of a prison, that there's plexiglass, that you're kept away, that you're not allowed to really see this process. It doesn't have to be that way. This is democracy happening. It should be open, available to the public so they can see and know that it's fair, that it's safe, that things are happening the way they should. I'm sorry to say that they're not, right? They're not following the law to the letter. And so we can change that. Again, this one person makes the decision. It can be changed.
Absolutely. That's a very interesting, I guess it's an interesting aspect of what's going on that I think many residents aren't even aware that A, these hearings are happening, and B, we have access to be able to participate or view and object when these hearings happen. I think you would see much more participation if it were publicized as such.
Yeah.
I know for one, I would
You know,
love to.
they're required to post on their website about it.
Right.
They minimize that. They're required to post 48-hour notice when the meeting is going to happen in a paper of general circulation, and they don't. So like, let's follow the law. Like let's involve and inform the public. It frustrates me, but I certainly want to make sure that people are aware that this is happening. I'm there. You have an advocate trying to pay attention to make sure that these votes are being counted the right way. My power will be much more when I'm the supervisor and I can really make sure that the law.
Absolutely. That's great. One of the things you touched on as well just a little bit ago was around early voting. So you mentioned that in Pinellas, there's 3 locations, and in Hillsborough, there's 20 plus locations for early voting. Could you help me understand a little bit more, A, about what early voting is, why is it important, and B, your thought process around why we're at a point where we only have 3 locations that we can utilize for that?
Yeah, great. It's a good question. So early voting is phenomenal. I didn't realize how awesome early voting was because I grew up in Pinellas, right? So we've always had 3. It took me leaving the county to say, hey, early voting is a time when if you're working on election day, you have this 2-week window when you can go vote early, meaning you don't have to be at the specific precinct, the only place, you check your voter registration, you have to figure out where the right place you are on election day. No, early voting is great. You can vote anywhere in the county at an early voting location. They'll find your ballot, the right precinct ballot for what you should vote. They'll hand it to you and you can vote. It's convenient. It's accessible. You can vote typically on the weekends as well. Again, these hours and times and dates are all set by the supervisor elections. It's a determination one person makes about your access to the ballot. I want to expand that, right? So Pinellas has only 3 early voting locations. I said, yeah, Hillsborough has 24 for this primary. Pasco, half of our population, has 11. Now, we lead the state in vote by mail. And so our supervisor elections under Deb Clark was a shining beacon for vote by mail. And it's good, particularly during this COVID crisis, that we had the infrastructure to handle vote by mail. We're doing a fairly decent job for vote by mail. Although for the first time, the postage will be paid for vote by mail. It's great. It shouldn't take a pandemic to do the right thing, but I'm glad it's going to happen. Well, once I'm elected, you won't ever have to look for a stamp again. We'll make sure that you can just put that ballot back in the mail. But you mentioned early voting. And so the focus for the previous supervisor elections and this supervisor elections was only on vote by mail. But early voting is a great resource. It's not this only, it's this and this and this. So it's making sure that you take care of vote by mail and early voting and election day, making sure that people have the choice that is most comfortable to them. There are some people, because of accessibility things, need to vote in person. They need to use a machine that will help them because of a disability. There are some other people that love to vote in person. They want to see that ballot go into that machine, get their stamp, be a part of the process, particularly if they were historically disenfranchised. They want to vote in person because it's important. And I appreciate that. I want to give people that access to the ballot too. So early voting expansion would give a lot of people, particularly, I think of like college campuses. You can have an early vote location if you don't have a car. For college campuses, you want to increase turnout. Early voting has shown that it will really increase college students' involvement in the process if there's an early voting location on their campus or near their campus to participate.
Absolutely, absolutely. Yeah, I completely agree. After hearing, some more about what early voting is, it's absolutely important to have those options available to the residents.
Yeah.
So having 3 locations currently is a bit concerning because, as you mentioned, some may not want or may not be able to go directly to the polls on the day of the election, or may not want to actually do, mail-in voting. But speaking of mail-in voting, we touched on that as well. So what are your thoughts on that? How do you feel that we're executing on that? I know that we lead the state based on your feedback earlier in regards to vote by mail, but that doesn't really tell us, that we're doing excellent from an execution perspective. So what's your feedback around that?
I will say that the Pinellas leads the state. And the thing that a lot of the concerned people about voter protection look at is what is called rejection rate. So when those ballots come in, if they're put aside or rejected for whatever reason, Pinellas has a very small rejection rate. Typically, ballots are rejected because there's no signature on a ballot, or there's a signature mismatch. And this can happen particularly for first-time voters that don't have the long history of a signature, and their whatever they sign their voter registration form looks very different from this first time they voted. So that can happen, but I will say the Pinellas is very good about vote by mail. I watched all 102,000 ballots go through the machines. I did see sometimes the machines would chop up a ballot or shred a ballot to some degree because of errors on the coffee stain or rain or things like that they then go through the right process to duplicate it. Although, it's one thing I'll say about these machines too is, we'll talk about it in a minute, is ballot images. There's an important safety feature that the ballot can be scanned by these machines to make sure there's a record, so that in case it's needed down the road. Our supervisor election sadly has not been storing these digital images that can be used as a redundancy, a safety valve for the public record.
So those images are not stored. What's happening with those images currently?
Yeah, there's a lawsuit about this. There's about 33 counties in the state. So there are a lot, depending on which county you're in, they will store these ballot images. And so these are fancy computer machines. You've probably seen them. It's like a scanner. You put that paper ballot. It's good to have that paper record. Those ballots are stored for 22 months in compliance with federal law. And so this paper ballot goes in. The machine actually takes a picture of that. And as immediately as they take a picture, they put it in RAM, and then they read that to count the ballot. Now, that picture, the default setting on the machines is to store all these images. Why? Because then you have a redundancy in case those paper ballots are misplaced or whatever.
Or whatever.
Yeah, that's right. You have this redundancy. Like 3,000 ballots were lost in Broward. If they had stored the digital images, they'd have those ballots. So there was a recount. They didn't have those digital images to recount. Our governor actually signed into law recently, hey, and starting in 2021, you can use just the digital ballots to do a recount. A lot of counties use the digital ballots right now to use third-party groups to do an audit of their elections, make sure that means, because you can use the technology these days. Digital images are much easier than paper ballots that you have to rescan and go through one at a time. And so it's an important feature that these machines' default setting stores all these images. Our supervisor elections turns this off. Now, there's not a good justification on why she would do this. It doesn't make any sense at all. And they've not given any explanation on why they would purposely, I call it shredding ballots. She's shredding the election material. It's in violation. You're required to store election material for 22 months under federal law, for a year under state law. And so it's a violation. It's problematic. It's an open and transparency problem. Why would you do this? I'm not going to give you an answer. That's what she said.
Right. But immediately, as a resident, my mind goes to what would be the purpose in destroying those? You keep the physical ones, but if the functionality defaults to scanning and storing, why are we intentionally taking an extra step to destroy it?
Yeah. I would say an answer, but again, this one person, I can change this. I can change it. I would make it a public record that people, if you want to conduct your own audit, suddenly you have the entire digital record that you could do so. That's easy to do. You wouldn't have to come in, there's a restriction.
When you say you want to do your own audit, who are you speaking of? Like a resident?
Yeah, so you as a citizen, I mean, since it's digital, there's a county in Wisconsin that actually puts up all the ballots so that people can do that as a public record. I would lead the state here. I would say, this is a public record. These are the ballots. If you want to conduct your own audit, here's all the data, right? Here's all the data. You can do it. That's what open and transparent elections look like. Here are all the ballots. If you want to double check me, make sure that I did everything right, do it.
Right. Yeah. That sounds insane that we would just delete good information. And it's sad that there's a lawsuit on something that is avoidable. But I also heard that there is another lawsuit about provisional ballots.
Yeah.
Can you tell me a little bit more about that?
So provisional ballots, so there's all these fancy rules and there's names of vote by mail, absentee ballot, provisional ballot, duplicate ballot, all these rules, right? So they're codified in the statute. Provisional ballots are a catch-all, right? So if you vote early or on election day at the polls, there's a safety net in case something goes wrong. So during the check-in process, if your signature doesn't match or you're challenged, or say, for instance, you forgot your ID and during the check-in process, you don't have your ID, you waited 2 hours in line, you got to the front of the line, and you don't have your ID. Oh no, do I have to go out and go get my ID and come back and wait another 2 hours? No, you can do this thing called a provisional ballot. It allows you to cast a normal ballot, and it's provisional pending a determination by the canvassing board that you actually were allowed to be registered to vote and you did everything right. You were allowed to vote on election day appropriately. You have to present typically more evidence. After you cast this provisional ballot, you sign the envelope, it's submitted to the canvassing board, and then you have sort of 2 days, 45 hours to submit evidence saying, hey, listen, here's a copy of my ID, here's my signature updated to make sure that I can prove that I'm that person and I was allowed to vote. And so you have this time to do that. And so this provisional ballot lawsuit is about these provisional records. And there's a third-party group, the Voter Protection Group, and I'm not a plaintiff in this lawsuit. I am a plaintiff in the ballot images lawsuit, but in this lawsuit, I'm not a plaintiff. I'm just an observer because it's how I will have to do the office. They put in a public records request, something standard. They've always put in this public records request. They want to know the list of people that had trouble voting on election day. They reach out to them by phone or email, or even in some cases, they used to knock on the door and say, hey, listen, we heard that you had trouble. We're lawyers. We want to give you help to make sure your ballot hasn't been counted yet, but we're here to make sure that your ballot can be counted. And so they reach out to these people and say, hey, we want to help. Now, our supervised elections for the first time in March said, no, you can't have these records. And so she put up this barrier saying, no, you can't have this information. After the lawsuit was filed, she did give the list of provisional ballot voters, but it took the lawsuit to make that happen. And in August, she said, I'm also not going to give you the list of provisional ballots. She's claiming an argument, secrecy of the ballot. It's a novel argument, although for public records exemptions, typically we have good, strong public records policy in Florida. We are the Sunshine State. Our public records are called sunshine laws because there's the best sort of cure for things is the best disinfectant, as they say, is sunlight. Even our president talked about sunlight being a great disinfectant, but that's a tangent. But anyway, so sunshine laws, great public records, and there normally needs to be a carve out, an exception in the statute that has to be, hey, this is not subject to public disclosure. And so that doesn't exist for this provisional ballot, although, there's this argument that secrecy of the ballot, there's a way that the provisional ballots are reported happens after there's sort of an unofficial tally. And so theoretically, somebody could figure out if there was only one provisional ballot at a precinct, you could say, hey, this is the number, it was 45, and then this person's ballot was counted. I saw it be counted at the canvassing board. I saw their name was Dan Helm, and I see that the tally went from 45 for Dan Helm, and now it's 46. And so, that they would be able to say, hey, that guy voted for Dan Helm. That harm still exists because the canvassing board meets. It doesn't exist because people have the list of provisional ballot voters. It exists because of the way the data is reported to the state. And so there's actually legislation to change that in March. And I'm way into the weeds here, but the legislation.
Oh, it's interesting information. It really is.
The legislation ultimately failed in the committee. Anyway, this is a lawsuit that's ongoing. I think that it's currently in appeals in the second district court of appeal in Florida. But it's something that I'll have to follow the law here with public records. I commend groups that just want to help people vote. I wouldn't be against groups that just want to help people get registered to vote, help people. Right. Keeping me honest, they're making sure that the process is fair, open, and transparent, and making, at the end of the day, helping voters that had trouble on election day vote. That's a good thing. I wouldn't discourage that.
Absolutely, absolutely. Do you know if that is something that change or the challenge of handing over the provisional ballots, is that something that is widespread across the U.S., or is that something that we saw specifically with our supervisor of elections being fearful of,
this is the only one that is in the state that made this position, right? So lots of other counties are giving out this information and continue to give out this information as a public record because they see, hey, listen, you want to help these voters? Great. I want to make sure their vote counts too. But essentially, our supervisors of elections is saying, no, I don't want to give you this information, and so you're not going to get it. And so putting up barriers instead of access.
Absolutely, absolutely. That's an interesting aspect. I did not know, again, that all of that work was going on. And thank you to all of those folks out there that are diligently working to make sure everybody's vote counts, actually.
Yeah, absolutely. There's lots of good people, volunteers that are doing that, and I'm happy. Hey, we're doing some knowledge transfer. The Mo, I love this show.
Absolutely. Yes. Thank you. Thank you very much. I do have a couple more questions for you, but what I do want to tell anyone that's watching, you can go ahead and type your comments or questions in to the comment section, and we're going to take some questions from you all here in just a moment. So you can go ahead and type those in right now. So you mentioned the pandemic and, the changes and challenges that it has brought around our election season, essentially. And when you think about the pandemic, COVID, I'd like to kind of get your feedback on COVID and the impacts that it may have from a scaled approach on how we have or hold our elections moving forward. So what are your thoughts around COVID and how the impacts we'll see long term on how we run our elections?
Yeah. And so, listen, this hits very close to home. My wife is a physician assistant at a hospital that sees a lot of COVID patients. It's something that I deal on a daily basis, sort of the PPE and the whole running through it when she comes home from work. And so I got involved in this race in part because of what the disruption of COVID happened in March. I saw our supervisor elections. I saw this crisis, this pandemic. Not only was a crisis for the country, but a crisis of leadership. Our supervisor elections did not do a good job in protecting the poll workers and giving out good information about closing of precincts and closing of polling places because of impact of this virus. And so I knew I had to step up because of COVID, right? We needed stronger leadership from this office. So I stepped up in part because of COVID. And it hit home when I was giving my qualifying papers to the current supervisor elections. The first time I met her, I'm entering a government building, I'm wearing a mask, I'm trying to be as safe as I can with surfaces and otherwise. And she comes up to me, not wearing a mask, and offers me a handshake. And normally great, affable, friendly, but not during a pandemic and a crisis where you should be wearing a mask and not touching people, right? So it was just a failure of leadership, and that goes from the top down. If the leader is not practicing safe policies, the employees are not going to be practicing safe policies. And so that's what I'm talking about, the crisis of leadership. We need better leadership. She said that she's not going to enforce the mask mandate at the polls. And that means she's just not going to follow the law, the county ordinance that says, hey, you got to wear a mask indoors. That's not keeping the voters safe. It's not keeping the polling place safe. It's not keeping even your own poll workers safe. The law says you have to wear a mask indoors. I didn't make the law. But you should follow the law, right? The same way, like if somebody showed up naked, would you say, oh yeah, come on in and vote? If somebody showed up with an AK-47, oh yeah, come on in. No, the law is clear here, right? So let's follow the law. And so let's keep people safe.
Absolutely. I think you really covered it right, clean and clear. And as I think back, I'm reflecting a little bit on my experiences when I went to the polls myself. And a lot of the poll workers were elderly, right? And so that's one of the things that I've been thinking about recently, and why I think that, being able to have the early voting option where it's less congested is important. Being able to mail in your vote is important, because the elderly with COVID going on are not going to be able to volunteer as readily as they did in the past. And so it's actually one of the things that I was checking into. How could I become a volunteer poll worker as well? So is that still an option, or do you know how we can do that if we're interested?
Yeah, so absolutely. Certainly reach out to me at change@votedanhelm.com. I can get you the information. I can also post the link there on the votepinellas.com. There's a link to register yourself as a poll worker. That's one thing I'm asking my volunteers, right? So great if you want to help, make phone calls, wave signs, give donations. That's awesome. But also, if you want to be a good public servant, be a poll worker, right? So protect that more at-risk generation. If you're younger and healthy, less at risk, be a poll worker. You're using systems and technology. You can make the process very good, and you get paid for the day, but you're also like being good public servant. So I'm asking that people be poll workers. We really need the help because it's our older, retired generation that is showing up to do that public service, but they are much more at risk for this virus. And so we can do our part and show up and relieve that for them, that greatest generation, the baby boomers generation, that keep them safe.
Absolutely. That's great. And I'll post your website up in just a moment as well. And I'd love to learn more about how I could take on that opportunity and do my civic duty as well. So I've had, I want to know from you. I want to learn from you. What are your thoughts about Amendment 4? What are your thoughts?
So absolutely. And I join with the county in voting overwhelmingly to approve Amendment 4, essentially bringing back people that have paid their debt to society back on the rolls. Absolutely awesome, right? Forgiveness. That was the idea behind Amendment 4. And I became more closely involved with this when I got to listen to the trial. One impact that COVID has had on the court system is everything's virtual. And benefit of that is that I actually got to call in and listen to the trial of Amendment 4. I got to hear the cross-examination. I got to hear the judge ask his own questions of the witnesses, of the expert testimony. And it was very interesting. Like I knew that was supposed to be a public hearing, and I called into the courthouse. I said, hey, I want to listen to this trial. And she said, oh yeah, we've been getting a lot of calls. Here's the phone number you call. Here's the passcode. You can listen in. And I just called in and I was able to listen. And so I had it on the background. So I was doing other work and I'd be, oh, wow. And so it was cool to listen to the process of a trial, particularly for a lawyer. That's awesome. It was fun. But I heard the frustration in the judge when he'd ask questions and not get a great response from the Division of Elections. Particularly one stat that stands out to me is there were 85,000 outstanding cases of ex-felons that had said, hey, Division of Elections, can I get registered to vote? I'm not sure if I still have any lingering fines or financial obligations that this state legislature put into effect, and I just want to get registered to vote. 85,000 of these cases, and the Division of Elections could handle only about 60 a day. And so the judge did some math here and he said, only 60 a day, that means not until 2024 are you really going to be able to give these people a determination on whether they can just get registered to vote.
And that's not including anything, any new,
Right. Absolutely. Yeah, those are only the ones that they had already. And he said, this is untenable. This is unworkable. And at the end of the day, this is a poll tax, essentially the lingering financial obligations that go into the court system. Say if you had a public defender and you required to pay money because of that public defender and you didn't, that money that you would pay for that public defender is used as a tax. It's used to fund the criminal justice system. And that's a tax in violation of the 24th Amendment that says you can't have a condition of registering to vote on a poll tax or other tax. And so that the judge said, hey, this is unconstitutional. You can't have this tax on your condition to vote.
Oh, wow. Yeah. So I'm staying tuned to that one. I'm going to start. I just took a couple of notes actually around this one. I'm going to stay tuned to that one because I've heard feedback from several folks around wanting to get that right back. And basically at 60 per day to even hear if eligible or not, that's a challenge. That's a big challenge. And
but yeah, so he ruled it was unconstitutional. It got kicked up. It's currently we're going to get a trial next Tuesday. A hearing next Tuesday at the 11th Circuit. So there was a stay from the 11th Circuit to hear this. They said, hold on, Judge. We want to review this, make sure that it really is unconstitutional. And so the 11th Circuit will hear it by the full panel on Tuesday and then give a determination. So I'm sorry to say for ex-felons that just want to get registered to vote, it's very much in limbo. Although the League of Women Voters has done a great job of identifying about 200,000 ex-felons that don't owe any money that can be back on the registration with the rolls. I'd reach out to them if you particularly if you're interested in, they have resources to help make sure that you're eligible to get registered to vote. I wish our supervisor of elections was leading on this issue to make sure people that paid their debt can come back on the rolls, be a part of democracy. Our democracy demands that we all participate, particularly those that have an interest in the system. So, oh no, Mo, you're frozen. That's all right. I just wowed her with Amendment 4. So yeah, Amendment 4 is, we voted as a county overwhelmingly to give people enfranchisement, the right to vote again, people that have served their time, paid their debts to society. And so, welcome back.
Hey, thank you for continuing on without me. Sorry about that. All right. So yeah, you know how the internet can be, but definitely, I did hear you say reach out to the League of Women Voters for more information and to hear more about that. But that's really interesting, and thank you for sharing and transferring that knowledge, so to speak, as well.
Yeah.
So in addition, I wanted to ask you a few questions and learn a little bit more. I saw you in the news around about Derek Chauvin, and I wanted you to maybe explain that a little bit more. Like, what is that? What is all of that about?
Yeah, so Derek Chauvin, he's the man who murdered George Floyd. He's the cop in Minnesota that knelt on the neck of another human being until
Right.
And so I was outraged when I saw that story.
Right.
And I was more outraged when I found out that Derek Chauvin had a home in Windermere, Florida, and I looked up the public record, his voting record, and he had voted in Florida even though he's living in Minnesota. So this was a man that was despicable in many ways, but also one that was violating our own laws in Florida. And so I did something. I wrote a letter to the supervisor of elections and the state attorney, essentially saying, hey, listen, this guy shouldn't be on the rolls. He committed a felony when he used his vacation home essentially to register to vote in our elections. It's clear why he did it, right? He wanted to have his vote matter more in a state than Minnesota, right? So, like he was strategic, right? He was abusing the system, but at the end of the day, it's actually a felony to do that. It's a voter fraud. You're not supposed to do that. You shouldn't do that. And there's not a large evidence of voter fraud. It's a very small, despite whatever our president says. There's not a lot of instances of voter fraud, but the way you prevent it is you call it out. You say, hey, listen, don't do this. We're going to prosecute. This is wrong. But yeah, so this individual did commit voter fraud. I'm saddened to say that, it's 9 weeks or so since I wrote that letter, and he's still on the rolls, right? So theoretically, he could have requested a vote by mail ballot to his Minnesota jail cell to vote in our Florida elections, which is preposterous, right? That doesn't make any sense. But I wish the supervisor of elections would act. The statute requires him just to give a recommendation to the state attorney. I'm sure the state attorney would investigate. One good thing that did happen is Minnesota saw my letter and they said, oh, this guy was registered to vote in Florida and used his address there. I wonder if he'd used his address for anything else. And they said, oh yeah, he used it for tax fraud. He was committing tax fraud in Minnesota. He was not paying appropriate taxes. And they just charged him with tax fraud charges in Minnesota. So it's good that they listen. I wish our own state would listen about what I said, but it's fine. At the end of the day, I hope he's held accountable first and foremost for his crime against George Floyd.
Absolutely. Thank you for that, and thank you for taking the initiative to do some research and bringing that to light. And I hope first and foremost he is held accountable for what he did to George Floyd, and also around his fraudulent voting practices.
Yeah.
As well. Yeah, absolutely. So again, for all of our viewers, the live chat is open. If you have any questions for Mr. Dan Helm, please type them into the comment section and we will get right to them. In the interim, I wanted to, you touched on a plethora of different things around what you would change and what you would bring to the office of supervisor of elections. in Pinellas County if you were elected. But I was wondering if you could kind of just summarize some of the key factors and key things that you would bring to that office.
Yes. So I will try and be concise, right? So lawyers, we're long-winded, we talk in circles. But listen, I want to make Pinellas safe, right? So I have this platform called SAFE. It's an acronym. It stands for Secure, Accessible, Fair Elections. SAFE. I want to secure from threats. That means threats of COVID. One thing we haven't talked about tonight is hurricanes. It's supposed to be a terrible hurricane season that could have a real impact. We're going to have 4 to 6 major storms. Those are like Hurricane Katrina-sized storms that can impact Florida in a real way. We know hurricanes. And so if that hits at the right time during early voting or on election day, it's going to really have an impact. Being prepared, creating awareness, good information through the website is important. So secure from COVID, keep people safe there, secure from threats of a hurricane, secure from threats of cybersecurity, right? So I look at the Supervised Elections website. I don't see somebody that really understands technology, as a clear systems in mind. We need to be better protected. 2 of our counties were hacked in Florida in 2016. We still don't know which 2, but if that's happening, we need to make sure that there's people that understand technology are utilizing it to the best of ability in that office. So that's secure. Yeah. Accessible. I want to make sure we expand early voting. That's accessible ballot. I want to expand vote by mail in terms of making sure that the postage is paid forever. Also encourage more people to vote by mail. It's a good, smooth process. Although we need every type, right? We need vote by mail, we need early voting, and we need election day to give people options. Options are good. So the accessible ballots, not barriers. And F, fair systems. I want to make sure that we have fair systems. That includes the rule of law, right? So I'm a lawyer. That's my background. I'm a rules guy. I want to see the rules followed. I want to make sure everybody can have the vote, right? I don't care who you're voting for. I love seeing you participate. I'm the guy, my wife hates this, but I see somebody with a sign. I don't care what they have their sign. If they're on a sidewalk and they're participating in democracy, using their free speech, I will honk in support of that, right? I support democracy. I support people exercising their franchise. That's what I'm about. I'm about fair systems. I want to make sure that everybody has a chance to participate. So the E is for elections, safe, secure, accessible, fair elections. Every vote counts. So that's my platform in a nutshell.
Awesome. Safe. I like that. Definitely, I can tell that you are absolutely fair. You care about accessibility, and I'm excited about everything that you've talked about tonight. I feel like I, as a resident of Pinellas County, are definitely more informed about your platforms, around your policies that you would put in place, some of the change that you would make, and I really appreciate you unpacking more around just the office in general. I learned more about the office in general and not just around what you would change. So that was so valuable, and I really appreciate that. What I'd like to do is give you an opportunity to make any comments or just some closing remarks now around why.
Yes.
Dan Helm.
Why Dan Helm? Listen, I really appreciate you hosting me tonight. Monique, it's a pleasure. It's great that my website's there, votedanhelm.com. You can learn more about me on my website. You can volunteer. You can give me a donation. I'm learning as a first-time candidate how expensive it is to do mailers. I don't have the luxury of my opponent that can send out using taxpayer dollars mailers with her picture and vote Julie Marcus and large text. It's also against
your name recognition too, right? From
it's expensive getting my name out there. If you can chip in a few dollars, I appreciate it. But also, if you really want to volunteer, be a poll worker, right? We need people to step up. I'm stepping up to be a public servant. I'm excited about it. I'm looking forward to the job. I think I'll do a much better job than our current supervised elections. And I want to make real change to make sure that people participate in this fragile thing we call democracy. So thanks again for having me. It's a real pleasure. I do meet and greets every week. If you want to come back, Monique, sometime in the next month, I'd love another opportunity after we see what happened in the primary. It'd be great to do another one of these.
Absolutely. I appreciate the opportunity to get to know you better and share it with all of my viewers, all of your viewers. And I look forward to hearing from you, and I'll be following you.
Great.
Thank you for your time.
You guys have a good night, everybody.
Good night.